conditions in the world to some degree. But the question that you all need to wrestle with individually is, how much do I adapt? And how much do I go beyond? Because when you begin to reach the levels of your divine plan where you are ready to express your Christhood, begin to express your Christhood, then expressing your Christhood is not adapting to the conditions of this world. It is demonstrating that it is possible to transcend those conditions. So you understand what I'm saying? How can you demonstrate to other people that it is possible to transcend a certain level of consciousness? Well, you must first take on that level of consciousness. That's why you take embodiment in a certain family, in a certain nation, in a certain culture. You immerse yourself in it for a time. And then when you are ready to start expressing your Christhood, you go beyond it. So it is not the immersion in the culture that is expressing Christhood, but it is going beyond it. Now, of course, again, you are not here to go so far beyond it that people cannot relate to you. You are here to demonstrate that it is possible to go beyond, that there is something beyond. And so what is Christhood? It is very individual. And that is why one of the worst things you can do for yourself is to look at my life and use that to create a standard for how a Christed being should behave. Many people have done this. The Christians have obviously done it, but many Ascended Master students have done the same thing. You have seen Ascended Master organizations where everybody was so focused on judging themselves and each other based on whether they lived up to this standard that they thought the Ascended Masters have defined. And so there is no standard for Christhood. That is what you need to grasp before you can really start expressing your Christhood. This is all individual. You have embodied in a specific situation. You have taken on certain conditions, a certain collective consciousness of your family, nation, and so forth. And expressing your Christhood means demonstrating that there is something higher than that standard. And in the beginning, it will not be very much higher. It will be a little bit higher, so that the people can still relate to you. Now, as you move further, you might go higher and higher, and you might get to a point where the people you grew up with can no longer relate to what you actually know and understand about life, and that's a different matter. But what I'm trying to show you here is that many of you have this far-flung, idealistic, romantic view of what it means to express Christhood. But in reality, in the beginning stages, Christhood is a very practical thing related to everyday conditions in your environment. It can just be a certain way to do things better, a certain way to look at things in a different way, to not take certain things so seriously, not take yourself or life so seriously, to be more joyful than other people, for example, or to not be so obsessive-compulsive about a certain aspect of your culture, such as hating those other people over there on the other side of the border, or on the other side of the street, or whatever may be the case. And so you can demonstrate that there is a different way, and this is an aspect of your Christhood in the beginning. Many of you can look back at your lives and see, but haven't I done this for most of my life? And you're right, you have. Many of you have already done this. I simply wish to make you aware of it and acknowledge that this was an expression of your Christhood. Because when you recognize that you have already expressed your Christhood, then it becomes easier to accept that you can actually be the Christ in action. You can actually express Christhood on earth. And it doesn't have to be some far-flung thing. as the idealistic view that the Christians have created of my life. Now, if you take the book about my lives, and if you take what I have said in other dictations and answers, you will see that my life really wasn't anywhere near the ideal that the Christians have created. I've said before that you could very well reason that at the end of my life, it had been a total failure. What had I actually accomplished on the outer? I hadn't even attracted any disciples who could really grasp the message that I came to bring. And so, I'm not trying to hereby put it down, but I'm trying to bridge the gap that many of you have in your minds, where you have this internal self that is so absolutely obsessive compulsive about pointing out your shortcomings and your mistakes that you tend to believe the projection that because you have made all these mistakes, you could not possibly be the Christ in this embodiment. And I'm trying to show you that being the Christ is a process. It starts out small, and then it can gradually grow. But you need to recognize that it doesn't happen just like that. It only happens by you taking one step at a time and gradually beginning to acknowledge that you do have the ability to be the open door for the Christ. Now, my beloved, what does it then mean to be the Christ? What does it mean to fulfill your divine plan? Again, there's a consciousness in the world created by the fallen beings that wants to take every idea, every concept, and reduce it to a linear standard that can be categorized and labeled by the analytical mind. One of you brought up that when he was going to this conference, people asked him, so what is the teaching you're following? And he couldn't give a name, because we have deliberately not given you a name. But it is an example of how people, without knowing it, have been influenced by the consciousness of the fallen beings, so that they always want to label something. They always want to name it so that it can be categorized, and now it is supposed to follow this standard. And so this is, of course, what the fallen beings have attempted to do with Christ. But the reality of Christ is that Christ never follows any standards. So, is there a standard for how you should express your Christhood in your particular situation? No, there isn't. However, that leads to the next question. What is it that is defined in your divine plan about Christhood? Is your divine plan like a standard for how you should conduct yourself in this lifetime, and thereby also for how you should express your Christhood? So, how does free will enter into your divine plan? Is your divine plan like a straitjacket, and in the beginning years of your life you do not have awareness of your divine plan, so you can pretty much do whatever you want, and then at some point you are supposed to come into awareness of your divine plan, and then the only choice you have left is, do I put on the straitjacket or don't I? And if you choose to put on the straitjacket of your divine plan, then the rest of your life is on a mechanical track, because now you're just following that divine plan that was spelled out for you. That, of course, isn't what your divine plan is about. Now, we have first of all said, you choose your divine plan. Over the decades where we have given the concept of a divine plan, we have seen many students interpret this to mean that your divine plan was created by some divine being who is therefore seeking to force it upon you, so you become a marionette. This is why there are some fallen beings who have created this idea that you only gain free will by rebelling against God. There are certain fallen beings that claim that it was only when they rebelled and refused to ascend that they gained truly free will. This is, of course, an illusion, because how free is your will when you are reacting against something else? It is exactly as free as when you are seeking to conform to something else. Your will is only free when you choose from within. And so, without going into a deeper philosophical discussion here, the reality is that your divine plan does not spell out in minute detail how you should live your entire life. So, we have said that you will never actually have a clear vision of the totality of your divine plan. You will only see this in stages. And why is that? Well, because if there was this very detailed divine plan, and if you saw the whole thing, then it would be like a mechanical path. You would just take step after step after step and follow it. But the reality is that your divine plan is made, as we have said, first of all, to raise your consciousness. And how do you raise your consciousness? By approaching a situation with the consciousness you have right now, and then making a choice to reach beyond that consciousness in order to deal with a particular problem. And when you reach beyond and experience that there is a higher way to look at the issue, that's when you have raised your consciousness to the next step. So, your divine plan specifies that you should get into a certain situation where you experience a certain condition. But your divine plan does not specify how you should react to that condition. That is your choice. Now, my beloved, be careful here. Many of you have imagined that your divine plan specifies certain outer conditions. For example, you are meant to meet a certain person and marry that person and have X amount of children. Many of you have based on this thought that if you don't meet that person, or if you meet that person and choose not to marry them, you're failing to fulfill your divine plan. But your divine plan is not that way. It is not that specific. Your divine plan is about your shifting consciousness. When it comes to all of the outer conditions, you have many choices. Now, there are, in the early stages, in the work stage of your divine plan, there are many times where you have karma with a certain person. And the quickest way to resolve that karma is to be in a relationship with that person. And therefore you could say, well, I have actually chosen that I want to be in with that relationship. So when I'm down here in embodiment, that is what I was meant to do. But nevertheless, you still have a wide range of choices as to how you deal with that situation. How long you stay in the relationship, how you react to the relationship, and so forth. But when you get beyond this work stage where you're not so much dealing with karmic conditions, you're beginning to go into the creative phase of your divine plan. All of a sudden, you have many more options. And this means that there isn't just, for example, one occupation, one kind of job or career you can have. And even if you choose a certain career, there isn't just one way you can conduct this. It is not like your life is on a track. Your divine plan does not put your life on a track that limits your options. You always have many choices, many options for how you do things, what you do. My beloved, what I'm saying here applies to those of you who are spiritual students who are at the higher levels. Naturally, there are many, many people at lower levels of consciousness who are more involved in karmic circumstances, and therefore their choices from past lives have created consequences that limit the options they have in this life. So you could go to a certain level of consciousness and see that there are people who have very few conscious choices they can make. But is this just because of the outer conditions, or is it because their consciousness is so limited that they are not willing to reach beyond their perception of the world? And so, what I'm saying here to you is, you also have a certain perception of the world. And in order to have more freedom, more choices, you need to transcend it. What is it that is holding you back? What is it that makes it sometimes feel like your divine plan is a straitjacket or your life is totally determined by outer conditions? It is that you have a certain self that has a certain perception. And that perception revolves around how you look at and react to your outer circumstances. And so, what is another aspect of Christhood? It is that you come to the realization that you are not here to be a slave of outer circumstances. You are here to transcend them. And this doesn't mean that if you have children, you abandon your children and go off and sit in a cave in the Himalayas. But it means that you transcend the view, the approach, the reactions you have to having children, so that you can find a higher way to look at this, where you are not so trapped in the current pattern. And so, this raises another important topic where many of you are wondering, how can I actually change my life? How can I have better conditions? I would like to do this, I would like to do that. I would like to have more money or a better job because I would actually like to have freedom to travel and meet people and see different cultures and this and that. And I wish that many of you actually have. And so we now come to the topic of how can you change your outer circumstances to facilitate the vision you have or the desires you have. And this is a very complex topic that I will not give you the final discourse on, because Saint Germain has something to say about this also, and other masters as well. But what I will give you is that Christ's discernment goes two ways. First of all, Christ's discernment can give you a vision that in your divine plan is the possibility that you can manifest a higher physical circumstance than you have right now, where you have more freedom. So this is a vision of what can happen. But on the other hand, the omega aspect of this is that Christ's discernment can also give you the vision that sometimes the desires or the vision you have is actually based on your primal self. And as Master Moore said, your primal self has this compensatory mechanism that often can give spiritual people a desire to escape certain conditions. But that reaction actually comes from the primal self. Now, one aspect of this is clearly that when you came as an avatar to this planet, you came with a positive attitude of wanting to bring positive change. Then you felt rejected by the fallen beings, put down by the fallen beings, and then you created the primal self, and ever since then you have felt, I can't be myself on this planet. I can't be who I am. I can't express whatever I want. I can't just be creative, because I always have to look at what reaction will I get? What will other people do or say or think? How will they reject me? What will they do to me? And so you have still the desire to express yourself, and then you have a mechanism that prevents you from expressing yourself. But what Christ's discernment can do for you is, it can help you see